Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Now today, we are decoding a highly stylized, intensely fascinating manifesto. It's this incredible text that weaves together some really profound concepts about self-preservation, the exact architecture of the human mind, and literally the lengths a person has to go to in order to protect their ultimate ambitions. We're going to look at how this singular, laser-focused worldview tries to bridge the massive gap between our highest, most towering dreams and the absolute most mundane, everyday habits required to actually get there. It's a pretty wild ride, so get comfortable.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because it's a wildly jarring juxtaposition, isn't it? On one hand, we have the ultimate pinnacle of a career, winning an Academy Award. And on the other hand, we have the incredibly mundane, everyday act of riding a bicycle. But look at the absolute gravity placed on both of these things. The author asserts, with complete deadpan earnestness, that invisible enemies are actively using subconscious programming, not to attack the Oscar dream directly, but to block the daily bicycle ride. This single sentence instantly hooks us into the author's reality, a reality where every single daily action is a high-stakes battlefield for ultimate success.
So to make sense of this, we move to Section 1, the architecture of consciousness. Because to understand how an enemy could program us against our own daily habits, we really have to understand the author's blueprint for our internal operating system.
Now, the author strictly separates two concepts that most of us just use interchangeably all the time. In this specific framework, the brain and the mind are twin states of consciousness, but they have very different jobs. Think of the mind as a higher-order system made up of lots of different subsystems. It's the active processor, the operating system, right? The brain, however, is simply the storehouse of information. It's the hard drive. And we really have to ground ourselves in these strict definitions because, in this manifesto, protecting your active mind from bad data entering your brain's hard drive is literally a matter of survival.
The author actually uses this incredibly intense, high-pressure metaphor to explain how our brains record this data. They describe decision-making moments as being under the heavy scrutiny of forensic investigators assessing severe charges, which they refer to as attractions of death. Now, obviously, this isn't literal, but it beautifully captures the psychological pressure cooker of high-stakes life choices. When you make a decision under that kind of extreme, life-altering stress, the resulting outcome doesn't just pass through you. It becomes a deeply imprinted, learned behavior that gets permanently stored in the brain's vault. Your mental hard drive is written in moments of extreme trial.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Oscar and the bicycle. This is exactly where these monumental concepts of consciousness crash right down into the reality of our daily routines.
In this framework, the Oscar represents any ultimate, overarching life goal you might have. But, you don't just wake up one day and win an Oscar. It requires daily health discipline and stamina, which is represented here by the bicycle. The author explicitly states cycling is good for health. But the absolute genius of this framework is the identification of the threat. The enemy doesn't try to steal the Oscar itself. No, the enemy tries to stop the daily cycling. Because if they can subtly disrupt that daily discipline, the ultimate goal just collapses on its own.
So the crucial point here is that the author demands total, unwavering conviction. Any hurdles or obstacles should be overcome by my consciousness. You cannot be a passive participant in your own mind. If the brain is just a hard drive storing learned behaviors, then it is entirely up to the active higher-order mind, your consciousness, to actively hurdle over the obstacles designed to stop your daily momentum.
All right, moving to Section 3, the subconscious enemy. We're shifting now from the goals we can clearly see to the invisible threats that are actively trying to sabotage us. The author defines this threat incredibly clearly, and honestly, it's pretty terrifying in its quietness. They call it a subtle effect of hypnosis. Now, we're not talking about a swinging pocket watch here. It is a state of severe vulnerability that happens if you fail to actively instruct your mind to reject negative suggestions of fear. If your mind is unguarded for even a moment, enemies can weaponize this subconscious programming. They slip fear right past your active defenses and literally force your consciousness to take automatic, self-destructive actions.
Let's see how this builds, because this invisible sabotage unfolds in a very strict sequence. Step 1. The seed is planted. Negative suggestions of fear are introduced. Maybe it's just a fleeting thought that cycling is useless or it's too hard today. Step 2. Because the active mind wasn't ordered to reject it, that subtle hypnosis takes hold. Step 3 is the critical failure point. Your consciousness is now forced to take automatic actions based entirely on that fear. You skip the bike ride. Which leads directly to Step 4, ultimate defeat. You have acted against your own carefully fed instructions. You've essentially defeated yourself.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real tragedy of the subconscious sabotage. So I am defeated way before I present myself as an actor in this world. Think about that. The battle isn't lost on the stage. It isn't lost at the glitzy awards ceremony. The battle is lost in the quiet, unseen moments of a Sunday morning, when that negative suggestion of fear successfully convinces you not to get on the bicycle. The defeat is entirely internal, and it happens long, long before the world ever sees you.
But, importantly, the author doesn't just leave us sitting there in defeat. They present this stark, punchy three-part realization of their very own journey through this exact vulnerability. I made mistake. I suffered. I evolved. It's a fast, incredibly rhythmic acknowledgement that mastering the architecture of your consciousness is born strictly through trial by fire. You let the fear in, you suffer the loss of your daily discipline, and then you evolve to ensure your mind forcefully rejects that subtle hypnosis the next time around.
Let's broaden this out to Section 4, the risk of strangers. As our awareness expands, the text really escalates the tension here, shifting from our internal subconscious right out to external vulnerabilities in the physical world.
The author actually applies their strict psychological framework directly to social interactions. They argue that trusting strangers is a highly risky effect in your life. But why? Well, because of what they call the affective component. This basically refers to our emotional vulnerability, our deeply human desire for connection or empathy or social harmony. When you're dealing with strangers, this emotional affective component actively tries to dominate your logical consciousness during the decision-making process. It basically clouds that higher-order system of the mind we talked about earlier.
And if you let that emotional component completely dominate, the text warns, you might be taking actions that eventually harm your own self. So what does this actually mean for you and your goals? Well, if you let an unvetted stranger trigger your emotional responses, you might end up making decisions that derail your daily discipline. Guarding against this specific kind of emotional manipulation isn't about just being cruel or cold. In the author's eyes, it is a truly critical, necessary defense mechanism for protecting your own ultimate Oscar.
Which finally brings us to Section 5, the game theory strategy. Having clearly established both the internal and external enemies, the author transitions into some chillingly pragmatic, even ruthless survival strategies.
The manifesto concludes with this stark look at game theory, presenting two chillingly simple options for dealing with your competition. Strategy A: you may win battles by fighting with better players in the game. You compete, you struggle, you try to outplay them the old-fashioned way. But then, look at strategy B. You may win the battle by removing those better players in the game. It is a dark, logically extreme conclusion to a philosophy that is built entirely around self-preservation and protecting one's own dream at absolutely any cost.
So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to turn this intense, laser-focused philosophy right back onto you. Because we all have an ultimate goal, right? Our very own Oscar. And we all have that mundane daily discipline required to get there, our own bicycle ride. So consider the architecture of your own consciousness today. What subtle, negative suggestions of fear have you been allowing past your defenses? What subconscious programming is currently blocking your daily ride? Take back control of your mind, and I'll see you in the next explainer.